I hope I learn something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days. I hope you learn something. I hope you learn something. I hope you learn something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days. I hope we learn something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days.
Howdy, howdy, howdy. I forgot to turn off the fans. There we go. Sorry about that. Welcome to the daily All Hat No Cattle News Rodeo. I'm your host, Hat. I'm going to sound a little different today. The voice may be a little off, but don't worry about it. Everything's fine. I would like to welcome some new people. JJ Leone just followed on D-Live. Thank you. And Twin Crier in Trovo. Thank you so much for the generous bullseye cast. Very nice of you. Very nice of you. And of course, all the great people on YouTube. Welcome, welcome, welcome as well. I have something for you. I teased it last week, and I'm going to do it. So just stand by and enjoy. Give me just a second. Drum roll, please. New hat. Ta-da! Got it. Got it. This is the new hat. I now have one hat for every day of the week. This is the Dunstan from the Last Best West out of Alberta, Canada. And it is probably my final cowboy hat, at least for some time. I may someday replace my straw, my Stetson straw. I'm not sure yet. Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to see. But I can't be happier to have it. It's a 100X beaver, top of the line. It'll last 100 years, guaranteed. No doubt about it. I can get this thing soaking wet. All I have to do is put a hat structure in the brim, inside the brim, to keep it from shrinking. Put it in a normal room temperature place, let it dry out, and it'll be 100% good as new. Every now and then I may have to have the brim reformed. That takes about 5 minutes. I am so delighted. This will be the new Monday hat, by the way. So you guys can be seeing that. I will now switch over to the standby hat for today. And we shall go along with the show. I have, of course, news about Minneapolis and Brooklyn Center in particular, the tragic shooting from the weekend and what's happened since then. Very sad, very sad. But in the after show, we'll get into some detail and my thoughts on this matter that I have only heard from one other person so far today. I didn't get a chance to watch anything yesterday, so we'll see what happens. But I haven't heard a lot of commentary like I'm going to make during the after show. And during the prequel, we also have some news about Democrat responses to the shooting. One in particular, that would be Representative Tlaib out of Michigan. Her particular reaction and reaction to that reaction. So let's get into it. First off, our first Babylon Bee bookend. This is the one on the left from their worldview section. Media relieved to be covering the good kind of riots again. And as you can see here, we have a shot on the left of the January 6th Capitol riot, and on the right, a mostly peaceful protest in Minneapolis and surrounding areas with riot police and tear gas. But nothing to see here. Dateline US, media organizations across the country announced today they are relieved to be covering the good kind of riots again, now that people are looting targets for justice again instead of protesting their government. Said Rachel Maddow, it was pretty rough there for a while. We had to cover the dark days of violent insurrection. But now that people are starting to steal Nikes to protest racial injustice, we can return to feel-good reporting about the good riots that are happening. She added happily, it's just the spring of love around here. Close quote. Many journalists are calling the shot of positivity the nation really needed in the aftermath of the worst days in our country's history following the riot at the Capitol. Finally, they say, the nation has remembered what protests are for, stealing stuff and burning things down before any facts have come in. Said Brian Stelter, I was pretty depressed having to cover the worst riots our nation has ever seen, he said as he wiped tears from his eyes on his Sunday program. We can finally get back to what the people want, puff pieces minimizing the violence and destruction wrought by protests that we agree with. But don't worry, we will continue to watch Fox News and yell at it, just for you. Close quote. Babylon Bee, everyone. Nailing it as always. And now my personal conceit, the market. The market has retreated just a fraction today, down 0.2% to closing below 33,680. The S&P 500 was up a fraction. The NASDAQ was up just over a full percent, closing just under 14,000. So record territory there. Gold saw an almost 0.75% increase, flirting with the 1,750 mark that it hasn't been at for a few days now. Crude oil staggered up over $60 a barrel, now sitting at dollars and 42 a barrel per West Texas Intermediate Sweet Crude. And Bitcoin has broken the 60,000 mark. It is now sitting at 63,170 and change. That's almost a 5.3% increase over the last notice. Okay, so the Daunte Wright shooting. An absolute tragedy. Any loss of life, especially a violent loss of life, is tragic. I mean, we have become a country where we are accustomed to our seniors living to the point where they are more likely to die of cancer than they are of old age. But unfortunately, homicide is the number one killer of young black men. And for young white men, it's usually automobile accidents. And that is a great shame. Now, we know where that statistic comes from, mainly from the fact that black-on-black crime in cities in our country is an epidemic and has not shown any signs of abating, and in fact gotten worse over the last 13 months. But this shooting in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, just north of Minneapolis, is a true true shame. A very young man died during a traffic stop. But we will get into the details of that in the after show. Unfortunately, though, even though Minneapolis and the environs were ready for riots as the Derek Chauvin trial is winding down, I've heard that a verdict could be reached as early as a week from today, perhaps earlier. But it seems they weren't prepared enough. After the shooting of Daunte Wright, there was rioting, not only in Brooklyn Center, but in Minneapolis, downtown. There was rioting and looting, burning, etc. So I have a story coming up. It was also on the West Coast. There were quote-unquote sympathy riots. We'll get into that in a moment. But as you guys know, I do not play riot porn on this channel. You can go to Twitter, anywhere else you want to watch as much of it as you like. I do not do that. I find it incredibly upsetting. There right now is a curfew, or was a curfew, I should say, until 6 o'clock this morning for counties, including Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis, and St. Paul, according to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. I'll have more on Governor Walz in a second. But a Minneapolis Police Department deputy chief said 13 were arrested in Minneapolis, 4 for burglaries, 2 were suspects in shot-fired incidents, 6 were for curfew violations, and 1 was on an outstanding warrant. And 5 businesses were burglarized in Minneapolis during the unrest. So we'll have to see how things go. Let's continue. All right, Governor Tim Walz. Let me give you a little background before I get into the governor of Minnesota. I live in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Yes, that Kenosha. And I remember very distinctly the 3 days of rioting that we had, the $500,000 worth of, $500 million worth of destruction we endured. Many buildings were burnt to the ground. There was widespread looting, vandalism, and the downtown and uptown areas, which are separate entities here in Kenosha, look like bombed out Berlin. It's so sad to see. So sad to see. And cleanup really hasn't even begun yet. I don't know where the money's going to come from. I really don't. Because insurance does not cover for disaster cleanup like you think it would. They pay pennies on the dollar for the damages you have endured. Now, you may know the Kenosha rioting was due to the fact that Jacob Blake, a black man, who had just violated a restraining order against a woman who had accused him of a previous sexual assault, was approached by police as he went to steal her car with 3 children in the car. Police attempted to arrest him. Blake wrestled them to the ground, 2 officers, brandished a knife, shrugged off 2 tasing attempts, and then while continuing to hold the knife, tried to get into the vehicle and drive away. And for that, Jacob Blake was shot in the back 7 times. At least one of the rounds severed his spinal cord at his waist, and he is now paralyzed from the waist down. A complete and utter tragedy that could have been easily avoided. And for that, my city burned to the ground. Burned to the ground. Now, a couple things could have been done to stop that. One, the mayor could have come out and not decried the shooting as racially motivated at the very beginning. The very first words out of our mayor's mouth were basically, Jacob Blake was shot because he's a black man fighting with a white cop. That was it. That was his take on the whole thing before any body cam footage or cell phone footage had come out. And the governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, did the same thing. Another tragic death of a black man at the hands of a white police officer, and the city burned to the ground. Of course, also, the governor had ample opportunity to call in the guard and refused to do so for 3 nights in a row. And for that, not only did the city burn and was looted, etc., but 3 people were shot and 2 died as a direct result of there being that lawlessness. So now we have the situation here in Minnesota. A young man resists arrest, and is accidentally shot by an officer who was reaching for her taser, supposedly. That's what we know. That's what we know. And what are the first words out of Governor Walz's mouth? At least his Twitter account? Quote, "I'm closely monitoring the situation in Brooklyn Center. Gwen and I are praying for Dwante Wright's family as our state mourns another life of a black man taken by law enforcement." Way to quell the racial animosity, Governor Walz. Way to go. By the way, you may notice on Governor Walz's Twitter bio, he's wearing a mask. No virtue signaling there whatsoever. So, it hasn't been all insanity. There was one voice of reason just recently, and that was Brooklyn Center and City Manager Kurt Buganey. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Manager Buganey made the cardinal sin of following the city rules during a press conference. He was describing what was going to happen to the officer involved in the shooting, who has since resigned, by the way. A female officer with 25 years on the force, and she's resigned. And, of course, there is an investigation ongoing as we speak. So Brooklyn Center City Manager Kurt Buganey was asked about the officer, and he said, "We have to wait for due process. We have a system in place between the police department, the city, and the police union, and we have to go through due process before we can determine whether or not she should be fired." And again, that was before she had resigned. And for saying that, and then backing himself up further when asked, "But aren't you just going to fire her? What do you think about it?" And he said, "I can't answer that question because that would get in the way of the due process. My feelings on this matter are not material to what is going to happen. We need to let the process play out. We need to allow for due process." So a cool head prevailing above all else, and he was fired. Flat out fired. The mayor pulled together an ad hoc meeting of the city council, and they held that emergency meeting, and they said, "This guy's got to go." Now, why did they fire him? Not because he broke city policy. The exact opposite. He was following it to the letter. Not because he was fanning flames of hatred by calling out a white officer shooting a black person for no reason. That didn't happen. Instead, he was fired because the city council and the mayor were worried that if they stood behind him, there would be rioting and that people would attack them. Yeah. By the way, was there no rioting? No, there was a lot of rioting. A lot of rioting. And looting. And burning. But the Brooklyn Center City higher-ups decided that it would be better to cover their ass than it would to stick by someone who is going by city policy. It was a complete bowing to the mob. They're literally saying, "We're afraid to do our jobs because the mob might come after us." Folks, that's the definition of terrorism. That is the absolute textbook definition of terrorism. Using force or violence to gain your advantage in a political situation or to make people bend to your political will. That is terrorism. According to U.S. Federal Code. Minnesota has allowed itself to be ruled by the mob. Now, you may know Minnesota used to be a red state. But no more. And look what's happening. I'd like to quote Melissa3838 in the chat. Also, officers do not make mistakes such as grabbing a gun instead of a taser. Enough with the FF fake news and made-up racism. Absolutely. In fact, Melissa, I have a piece about officers grabbing guns instead of tasers in the after show. So please stick around. I think you'll find it very illuminating. So as I said, not only was there rioting in Minneapolis Center and Minneapolis downtown, but Seattle had sympathy rioting and looting because, because. So I've got an article here from the Post Millennial, great newspaper out of Canada. They do excellent American news. Andy No is, I believe, their editor-in-chief. But there's some video here. If you go to the Post Millennial website, postmillennial.com, thepostmillennial.com, you'll see some tweets, videos of damage throughout Seattle with solidarity marching, mainly along 5th Street in downtown Seattle. And it's an armed group that gathered in Pioneer Square downtown and then moved out. And all the police did was yell at them to stop blocking traffic. There were a couple of arrests, but for the most part, these people just ran wild. It was an unlawful assembly, but it was allowed to continue, no problem. And you won't believe this, but this was all put together on social media. But not Rumble, not Parler, Facebook and Twitter. That's where all this rioting was coordinated. But who are we to judge? So, of course, as I said, cooler heads are prevailing among the Democrats, one in particular, and that is Representative Rashida Tlaib. I can never pronounce it right. It's spelt Tlaib, but I believe it's pronounced Tlaib. And she put the Democrat finger on the pulse of America, and I'm quoting. This is a tweet from yesterday evening. It wasn't an accident, referring to the Daunte Wright shooting. It wasn't an accident. Policing in our country is inherently and intentionally racist. Daunte Wright was met with aggression and violence. I am done with those who condone government-funded murder. No more policing, incarceration, and militarization. It can't be reformed. Okay. So, that is one of the loudest voices in the Democrat Party calling for the complete abolishment of police. Not reform, not defunding, but abolishment. This is the party that wants to take away our guns. So they don't want any kind of armed response to armed criminals or criminals that try to take your life with fists and hands. But they are all for the National Guard in the Capitol and fencing around the Capitol building because reasons. Last I heard, they were talking about beefing up the Capitol Police, not defunding it. You guys remember, we covered this pretty extensively in the aftermath of the November 2020 elections, how the Democrats lost major seats in the House. We almost won the House back in a presidential year, which is basically unheard of. We almost won it back. And there was a leaked call between Democrat super-ups, including a couple of representatives, one who won her district and another who lost. And those two reps, both of them said, both women, that the Democrat talking point of defunding the police cost them seats. And the one who lost her race said specifically, it's that rhetoric that cost me my seat. We are going to lose if we keep this up. That's almost a direct quote. Thank you for the compliment, Melissa. That's very kind of you. Thank you. So, she's just going full bore now. Full bore. And the responses on Twitter, for the most part, were insane. You know, Twitter is mainly a left-wing echo chamber now. And I'm not going to bother you reading some of the stupidity that followed up this absolutely massively horrific take on policing in America. But there were some cooler heads. One person that goes by Zaid Jilani I don't know Saeed Jilani. I don't follow Twitter very much at all, so I don't know who this person is. I guess I could look at their bio. Let's see. Write stuff, read stuff, build stuff. Followed by Andy No, Mike Cernovich, and 2 others you follow. Okay, he's got 88,000 followers. So Saeed is obviously someone of import. And Saeed mentioned that a couple months ago, the same representative from Michigan thanked the FBI because she was getting death threats. Now, all members of Congress, in fact, all really political figures at one point or another get death threats. I've been told to kill myself on several occasions. Guess what? I'm not going to. Sorry to disappoint you. But Representative Tlaib was getting death threats, and the FBI investigated, and things were taken care of. And she thanked them for that. So, as Saeed puts it in his tweet, do lawmakers who have the best security in America have any concern for people who lack such privileges? Excellent question. Excellent question. Another great response. Bob Woodson. If you don't know who Bob Woodson is, stop watching the channel and go look up Bob Woodson. He is the director of, let me get it right, I don't want to mess it up, the Woodson Center. And the Woodson Center used to be called the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. And he is basically kind of, I don't want to overstate this, but he's kind of the Booker T. Washington of the modern black community. But he doesn't get anywhere near the press he should because he's mainly conservative regarding what would best suit the black community to get back on its feet, which would be things like stop having kids out of wedlock, stop dropping out of high school, and stop selling drugs. He tries to set young men on the right path, and he's been eminently successful in what limited resources he has to his disposal. But Mr. Woodson had this response, for Rashida's tweet. No more policing? Okay, all politicians who want to defund and eliminate the police should lead by example and start with their own security detail, personal neighborhoods, and government offices. Give up your protection. Bob Woodson. Last one. Will Salatin. Will Salatin, folks, is a national correspondent for Slate. Now, if you don't know who Slate is, or what Slate is, just go to slate.com and read for about 13 seconds. And you will find them to be an overtly left-wing outlet. They are absolutely beyond the pale on the left when it comes to publications, online publications. They are not doing well financially. They have had to scale back noticeably over their offices that they had just 3 years ago. But they're hanging in there. And Will is not unknown on Twitter. He has over 55,500 followers. And here's his take. And again, this is the far left talking, folks. The surest way to lose politicians who protect bad cops is to be the party of no cops. That is not Donald Trump saying that, folks. That is a writer for Slate. Let me read that again. The surest way to lose politicians who protect bad cops, which is of course a false premise, is to be the party of no cops. Even he is saying this is a huge loss for the Democrats. So, will the Democrat cognoscenti tell people like Tlaib to shut up? Probably not. They'll probably tacitly agree with her. And the Republicans are going to start cutting ads left and right, featuring this tweet, and the lack of response from people like Pelosi and Schumer at all. I mean, people are already starting to pop up for primary races for 2022. Picasso's and I have already donated to, I think, 3 of them. And as soon as Sarah Huckabee Sanders announces her running for governor of Arkansas, we'll be donating to her too. Because Asa Hutchinson is a huge disappointment. We covered that last week. All right, moving right along. So speaking of Georgia, and I said I was talking about Arkansas, but we're on Georgia now. Speaking of states, we all know the huge kerfuffle over Bill 202. I've covered that extensively here. I don't need to go into it again. But I do have an interesting video coming up on some students at George Washington University and their responses to being read the salient points of Bill 202. But the main thing right now, this article from Fox News by David Rutz, is about the mass of disinformation and out lies that came from the Democrats as Bill 202 was passed and signed into law. You'll know that the liar-in-chief, 46 asterisk himself, called it Jim Crow 2.0 and Jim Crow on steroids and said it made Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. I still have not found anyone who knows what that means. And if you do, please put it in the chat and I will raise it to the high heavens. We found out that Stacey Abrams was directly involved in getting Major League Baseball to pull the All-Star game out of Atlanta, and where it ultimately wound up in Denver. So going from a majority black city to a distinct single-digit percentage minority white city. Excuse me just a second. I'm getting a notice on YouTube. Let's see what's going on here. Keyframe frequency. Oh, shut up. I didn't change my keyframe frequency. Anyway, and she then lied about being disappointed that MLB moved the game, acting as if she had nothing to do with it. And some other Democrats, especially Georgia Democrats, have virtue signaled about how they railed against the bill, while at the same time are disappointed that their citizens lost $100 million plus in revenue that they would have received from people coming into Atlanta for the ball game, and also from people coming in for the Major League Draft that is later this summer. Or I'm sorry, I don't know when. I was thinking of something else actually. I don't know when the Major League Draft is. I'm just pull that date out of your heads. I didn't say that. So one of the people also involved in this push to make Bill 202 look like Jim Crow on steroids was current Georgia Senator and all-around nut job, Reverend Raphael Warnock. Raphael Warnock is a fan of the Cuban ex-dictator Fidel Castro. He is a Marxist, and he is a racist. He's also anti-Semitic. But he's a senator for Georgia right now. Now he's up for election in 2022. He's filling out a nearly expired term from a previous senator. So he's not on for the long haul. And I've got some good news about someone who may be running against him soon. But Warnock had a hand in Major League Baseball leaving too, although not as direct as Stacey Abrams. By the way, Warnock is a co-defendant with Abrams in a voter fraud case in Georgia right now for signing up illegal voter registers to vote in the November election. Not a lot of word on that right now. But turns out Warnock signed off on an email that was being sent out by a group. Let me see if I can find the name of it again. 3.14 Action. I have no idea what that's for. It's a liberal nonprofit. And they put out an email 5 days after Bill 202 was signed into law, lying about what was in it. It had in its text that the new law restricted weekend early voting and ended no-excuse mail voting, both of which are complete and utter lies. The new law actually expanded weekend early voting. And it did not end no excuse mail-in voting. The only thing that bill did regards to mail-in voting was to make the time to apply for a mail-in ballot shorter. But there's still no excuse needed for a mail-in ballot in Georgia, which I think is insane, but that's just me. Nobody asked me my opinion when they passed the law. Probably shouldn't have. But Warnock's name was on that email. And he said, yeah, I did sign it, but it's not my fault because when they put the email together, those two things were under consideration in the State House at the time. Well, that's pretty weak because that email came out 5 full days after the bill had been signed into law. There is not one Georgia Democrat without figurative blood on their hands when it comes to what Major League Baseball and woke corporate, as I have coined the term, have done to them, to their state and to their citizens, with their inflammatory and absolute mendacious rhetoric regarding Bill 202. Oops, sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Give me just a moment. Okay, so let me switch up a little bit. Let me do this, then I'll do campus reform. So, who could be running against Raphael Warnock, you ask? Herschel Walker could be one. Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker, one of the great running backs of all time in the NFL. You may know, may not know, he was initially in the Canadian Football League, where he was setting records left and right, and then he was picked up by the NFL. That doesn't happen very often at all, folks. But Herschel Walker was one of those cases. And if I've gotten that wrong, please forgive me. You guys know that my memory is shot due to lack of oxygen over the last year. So if I got that wrong, please put in the chat who I should be talking about. But I'm remembering right now that it was Herschel Walker, who was former CFL, who got into the NFL. Yes, pardon, I'm thinking it's Monday still. Sunday on Maria Bartiromo's excellent show, Sunday Morning Futures, Herschel Walker did a stand-up regarding Bill 202 and how it affected Georgia, the fallout. But he was also asked point blank whether or not he would run for Senate. And this article here in the Daily Wire by Paul Bois, Herschel said, "We're praying about it." Let me read you the direct quote. "I'm very honored that they would consider me running for the Senate, and my family, we're still going through this process of praying and really considering it. People want me to decide right now, and I said, guys, I'm going to take my time because this is a very serious thing. But I will tell you this, Herschel Walker believes in God, I believe in this country, I believe in the people, and I'm going to fight for the people of Georgia if I run, so stay tuned. It's going to be exciting." A couple other things I want to quote you from Herschel Walker in this article. First, he was asked about Bill 202 being racist for daring to require voter ID, even though you don't necessarily need an ID to send in a mail-in ballot, which again is universal. There's no excuse; you just have to ask for one. But you can use the last 4 digits of your social. You can include a copy of a recent utility bill proving your address. You can include your driver's license number. Or you can include a voter ID. All of which are perfectly legal in Georgia. So we were told that that's racist. Minorities can't get IDs. Something that has been disabused time and time again since 2016. So Walker was asked about that. And he said, remember, Herschel Walker is a black man living in Georgia. He said, having an ID is a basic thing you gotta have. Right now, my grandfather today would be over 117 years old, and he had a driver's license. Everyone born in America got a birth certificate. Another quote, Walker was asked about why he's no longer a Democrat. What made him move away? And I'm quoting him here. I love the Lord Jesus Christ, and when I started seeing the Democratic Party, and I want to say the other party, when I start seeing them not want to talk about God and removing God, and then I saw the BLM burning a cross and also burning the Holy Bible and burning a flag, and that's not something I want to be a part of, I'm not that. Again, quoting Herschel Walker. So, I know where my money's going for Georgia Senate. Okay, so I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there's an outfit called Campus Reform. They have a great website, campusreform.org. You really need to go there whenever you can. And they do a lot of videos exposing the stupidity of liberal students on American colleges, which is basically 90% of them. The 10% who are conservatives are too afraid to speak to let their voices be heard almost all the time. And this is no different. They went to George Washington University, an absolute massively liberal area, and they went up to students and asked them if they were familiar with the controversy around Bill 202. And those who said yes and made the cut were in this video. It's just over 4.5 minutes long. I'm only going to play you a very brief clip of it. But what the interviewer did was he would say, okay, you're familiar with Bill 202. What do you think about these provisions instead of what's in that bill? And he would then proceed to read the exact provisions from the bill. The voter ID that I just described, no excuse mail-in voting, expanded weekend hours, expanded expanded drop boxes. And they all said, oh, no, those sound good. They should have done that. And so then the interviewer went back and said, well, actually, these are all from Bill 202. These are the things it did. And then the cognitive dissonance kicked in. And you could see the little hamsters running on their treadmills in their heads as they tried to walk back what they had just said. Because now that they've been exposed as being idiots, they have to somehow support their own idiocy. My favorite piece of the video, though, is right here. I've got this queued up, two young women, and the interviewer has just asked them about, I was about to ask them, I should say, about voter ID, and how 70% of black voters say voting ID is a good thing. And their response is basically, yeah, well, that's them, but I know better. Listen to this. I think the audio's right. If not, I'll correct it and start over.
And a half, whatever. Do you think that's enough time?
No, that's too low. Okay, here we go. And he's also asking them that the election, he gets it wrong. He said the election is 3.5 years away. He's thinking of the general, not the midterm. So I'm going to have to call him out on that. But he's asking them, is there enough time for these people to get an ID? And do you think it's fair to them to do so? And they're idiots.
Time for people to get an ID?
No, I think it's kind of classist to require it.
A poll came out that showed 70% of black Americans do support voter ID. So, a lot of people are calling it Jim Crow suppression and stuff, but the majority of black Americans actually support it.
Okay, I don't.
Okay.
Okay, I don't. White liberals are screaming from the rooftops that requiring voter ID is racist. They're confronted with the fact that no, that community itself says you're wrong, and they come back with, well, then they're wrong. I don't support their view on this. Who's the racist party again, you guys? Which party got more minority votes in 2020 than ever before since 1960? It wasn't the Democrats. What party has actual members, long-standing members, screaming that the current border policy is killing their districts. Not Republicans. What states have their citizens leaving in droves due to high taxes, high crimes, and crap schools? Ain't the Republicans. Yet we're supposed to believe the Republicans are the party of racists and rich white guys, when the Democrats are the ones who set records for corporate donations during the last election cycle, and also had dark money donations to the tune of 3 to 3.5 to 1 over the Republican Party. But who am I to judge? Touch on this. You guys may remember last year I covered a piece where a number of Black Lives Matter local organizations were calling for money from BLM International because they were told that BLM had International had collected some $90 million in 2020 alone, and they weren't seeing a dime of it. In fact, at the time that story came out, a grand total of $386,000 had been distributed to local BLM chapters out of that $90 million. We also saw that some $4.5 million was spent on consultants, salaries, and travel expenses. And just last month, or was it 2 months ago, the father of Michael Brown, hands up, don't shoot, a lie, but still, the father of Michael Brown from Ferguson, Missouri, is suing Black Lives Matter International for some $10 million. Or is it actually $100 million, pardon me, yeah. Because he says they have raised millions upon millions of dollars doing grassroots organizing in their community, and they haven't seen a dime from BLM International. And they want their share, which is only fair. I'm right there with them. I don't agree with BLM International in any way, stretch, or form. They're Marxists, so they're anti-capitalists, they're racists, and they don't believe in the nuclear family. In fact, they want the nuclear family destroyed. That was all on their website last year before they took it down. All on their website. And it's gotten worse because I'm sure you've heard by now that Patrice Cullors, I don't know if I pronounced that right or not, I don't care, who's a co-founder of BLM, who is an avowed Marxist. She said so on tape. She's a trained Marxist organizer. She spent millions of dollars in real estate purchases since 2016, including a $1.4 million estate in Topanga Canyon, California, which is outside of LA, a community that is about 96% white. Now, as we all know, all white people want to kill all black people, according to Patrice Cullors and Black Lives Matter International. Technically, Black Lives Matter Global Network, but it's shorter my way. So I'm not actually sure what she's thinking there. Maybe she's going to start it's a chapter. She's going to start a BLM chapter in Topanga Canyon, and she just needed a nice headquarters for it. But she's also spent another close to $3 million on other properties since 2016. And people are really, really ticked off. Really ticked off. Including Hank Newsom. Hank Newsom, who I believe also calls himself Hawk, it leaves Black Lives Matter Greater New York City. Yeah, it says here Hawk Newsom. I'm getting this from the Daily Wire by Tim Pierce. And Hawk is calling for an independent investigation, and that's a quote, an independent investigation into Color's finances and the operations of the National Black Lives Matter group. Quoting Hawk, "If you go around calling yourself a socialist, you have to ask how much of her own personal money is going to charitable causes. It's really sad because it makes people doubt the validity of the movement and overlook the fact that it's the people that carry this movement." Quoting the article further, "The LA and Atlanta purchases came after the publication of Color's memoir, When They Call You a Terrorist, and after she signed, quote, a multi-platform deal with Warner Brothers Television Group. She spent $415,000 on a, quote, custom ranch near Atlanta, along with the another total of $3.2 million on the 4 properties since 2016 altogether. And Hawk is ticked. And as I covered last year, 10 local Black Lives Matter chapters accused the National Foundation of hiding, quote, untold millions of dollars, close quote, from activists and called for greater transparency in the organization. All is not well. But what's going to come of it? Nothing. Nothing's going to come of it. I don't expect anything to change. Corporate America is still going to be showering them with dollars. By the way, I have an article in the after show about how spending that kind of money on righteous causes doesn't get you anywhere, but that'll be for the after show. Continuing right along, and we're almost done here. Turns out, Colors also has a consulting firm, and it is a pure capitalist enterprise. It is called, let's see, what's the name of it again here? Let me get it for a second. Janaya and Patrice Consulting, LLC. It's named after Colors and her spouse, Janaya Khan. And it says it specializes in transforming organizations one strategic planning session at a time. So they are pure corporate folks. You don't know a lot of Marxists who have LLCs, except for one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, it turns out. Now, the website has been taken down. It disappeared over the weekend. You can find archive copies of it everywhere. It's popping up like mushrooms after a rain. But let me just read you one frame from their website. How we help you succeed. One-on-one coaching, anti-bias training, racial and gender justice training, long and short-term consulting, media strategy and development, strategic planning, organizational development, creative content creation. Total Marxist, folks. Total Marxist. All right, couple odds and ends here, and we'll be done with the first part of the show, and we'll get into the after show. First off, you'll remember that Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota pulled back from signing an anti-transgender sports bill because she was worried that the NCAA was going to sue the state out of existence, and rightfully so, it turns out. I backed Governor Noem's move from the start. I think what she did was the tough political decision, but the smart strategic decision. She's trying to get together a coalition of states to go after the NCAA. That way the NCAA can't gang up on you one at a time. Divide and conquer, right? That's what woke America, woke corporate loves to do. And NCAA is definitely woke corporate. Anyone who tells you the NCAA is about the athletes is lying. Lying. But the NCAA, an article here from Paul Bois again from the Daily Wire, unequivocally supports transgender student athletes. As far as the NCAA is concerned, there's no reason whatsoever that men who call themselves women shouldn't be able to compete in the women's categories in collegiate sports. None whatsoever. Now, they have supposedly science behind them. They believe in something called testosterone reduction or testosterone blocking. Whereas if you're a man and you want to compete in a woman's sport after you declare yourself a woman, you have to undergo a year of testosterone blocking in order to get your testosterone levels down to a point where the NCAA, and the Olympics feel the same way, by the way, is to a sign where you wouldn't, quote, have an advantage over a biological woman. Here's the thing, though. Got this article, this quote here. According to a recent study from the British Journal of Sports Medicine, biological men underwent a year of hormone treatment and still enjoyed a solid advantage over their female peers. Though the researchers did say that 2 years of hormone treatment did show some signs, positive signs, for transgender athletes, they ultimately admitted that there is no possible way to completely eliminate biological advantage given how the body develops during puberty. End quote, end of discussion. If you're born a man and you go through puberty, you can kick the ass of pretty much any female athlete out there, generally speaking. And as I've said before, and I'll continue to say, I will stop beating this drum as soon as you find me one trans man, a woman who is converted, however, hormonally, whatever, into a man, that can win in a men's athletic competition. Show me one example of that, and I may start backing off on this. So far, there isn't one. All right, last part, and we're out of here. I've been talking about this quite a bit. The Russians are continuing to build up troops on the Russia-Ukrainian border. You remember that back in 2015, the Russians invaded Crimea, eastern Ukraine, and took over that peninsula, including the Black Sea port of Sevastopol. And the Obama-Biden administration sent blankets, MREs, and walkie-talkies to the Ukrainians as they were fighting for their lives. It took Trump to send them lethal munitions, anti-tank weapons, defensive weapons. But that is no substitute for tens of thousands of troops. And Russia is pouring thousands and thousands of troops onto the border. They say it's in conjunction with a military exercise, but they are refusing to talk to anyone in regards to trying to draw back those troops. This is obviously a direct challenge to the 46 asterisk administration. Secretary of State Blinken, met with the NATO Chief of Command just a few days ago. We haven't been told what they talked about. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, although a number of NATO countries have said they would extend aid to them if Russia did invade. But by then, I'm sure it would be too late. So Russia is refusing to have any talks with any Ukrainians regarding these troop increases. They're blowing them off completely. The president of Ukraine himself has reached out to the Russians, and they're pretending they never even heard from him. So I've got a quote here from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He's in Egypt, or he was in Egypt, and he was asked about the military activity, and he said that that question should be directed at Washington, not Moscow. Quote, questions are being asked about what Russia is doing on the border with Ukraine. The answer is very simple. We live there. It's our country. But what is the United States doing thousands of kilometers from its own territory with its warships and troops in Ukraine? The diplomat dismissed, quote, these calls for putting an end to some ephemeral, aggressive actions and threats and warnings that some price will have to be paid. There it is. There it is. So China's talking seriously about invading Taiwan. Russia is looking very, very serious about invading Ukraine and taking over the entire country, which we know Putin wants to do. Putin wants all of the old Soviet vassal states back. All of them. He has made no bones about that. As far as he's concerned, Russia needs to go back to its former glory under the days of the Soviet Union. And do not forget, Putin is former ex-KGB. He is an ex-KGB colonel who made his bones in East Germany, running the Stasi. This is not a generous man. And I don't want to see what's going to happen, because if we wind up getting in a ground war in Eastern Europe, then our back door in the Pacific is going to be wide open. And we don't have the military to fight on two fronts right now. We just don't. All right. That is it for the YouTube section. Thank you so much for being here. Green Badgers Outdoors. I did miss your chat earlier, but I do want to cover it now. Regarding Jim Crow, making Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. Green Badgers Outdoors said in the YouTube chat, I believe Joe is trying to imply that eagles are bigger than crows. True, that is correct on its face, but Biden was making the opposite comparison. He was saying that that the Bill 202 made Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle, not made Jim Eagle look like Jim Crow, which would have been the way to go, as you're describing it. But that is a nit not worth picking. Thank you so much for your chat, and thank you for being here. All right, folks, we are moving to DLive and Trovo. For those of you who haven't done so yet, please check out the DLive app. It's available for your mobile phones, and Android and iTunes, or Android and iPhone. That was easy for me to say. Android and iPhone. Also, you can get there at dlive.tv/saying goodbye. So God bless, be well, and I'll see you tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern YouTube. Bye-bye.